All right, family. Oh, shoot. Cut that down. Get this show on the road. All right, my people. I know you probably hear my chair going ham sandwich in the background, but you know how that go. You need some WD 40. Where we at? Front game. There we go. Family, so glad to be back with you for another episode of Swami Live. I hope you've had a fantastic weekend and a great week since the last time we were together. So excited to be back with you as always. If you are new here, this is Swami Live. And what we do here is discuss healing in all its various formats through live energy readings. We learn different information. We've watched videos. We've taken tests. Anything to help us be able to evolve into the best version of ourselves, which we are so excited about. Okay, good. Not okay, good. Never mind. And why we do that is to be able to create a collective energy that supports our growth and development, where we'll be surrounded by people in the same boat as us, trying to do the same things as us to get to the best version of themselves as well, right? So that's the main purpose of this. Oh no. I didn't bring it in here. Give me 1 second, family. You know I got to give a shout out to the book, and I left my book, my copy, somewhere. So I'll be right back. Okay. It's a little warm in here. It's one of those perfect days. Not necessarily perfect days, but we'll be talking about polarity today, and it's a perfect example because we're getting out of winter, and it went straight from snow to summertime heat. Anyway, if you like the show, you want to support the channel, you can catch us every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Tuesday, of course, is the day that we do all of our healing discussions, and Thursday is our book club where we are reading Changeling now. And you can always get in the crowd or get in the chat or send me an inbox if you want to suggest something that you'd like to hear us read, comment, and participate in. And that is, you can catch us on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Instagram again every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Right? So, generally, at the beginning of every show, we do a little bit of energy work, and this week we are on our third eye. Third eye. Well, I'm all out of whack. But our third eye, which is located right there in your forehead, and you can better understand it as your intuition. That inner voice that guides you through a lot of different things. And we also learned another interpretation of intuition is your subconscious recognizing the pattern before your conscious mind do. So your third eye is one, in control of your intuition. It is the energy space for your vision. It is the energy space for your perception. And astral travel. Astral travel sounds all magical, but it is just the ability to look forward, look backwards, and feel the things as though they are still happening. Like when you can think about one of the best times you had as a child, and it's almost like you can still smell the smell and hear the sounds. That'd be a simple form of astral projecting. The element for your third eye is light. So when you want to activate your third eye, you want to make sure you spend a little time in some light, whether it be sunlight, whether it be room lights, however you do it. The color is indigo. So spend some time in some indigo lights, right? If you are into essential oils and aromatherapy, you want to think of rosemary, cedarwood, clary sage, and patchouli. If you are into crystals and gemstones, you want to think labradorite, purple fluorite, amethyst, and sodalite. And I seen a whole bunch of sodalite over the weekend. I ain't see a lot of labradorite. I saw some purple fluorite too. And I keep laughing at myself because I saw this video about when somebody's having to have a serious conversation with you and you're sitting in one of the spinning chairs and Buddy was just spinning around like a kid. I was one of those kids that just love spinning chairs. So I spin and rock. Those are two of my favorite things. Spin, rock, spin, rock. So I can't help myself and I have to laugh at myself sometimes when I catch myself doing it unconsciously. But it is a good form of self-soothing or just to keep me calm. So self-soothing is a perfect example. So generally the next thing we do as we do our energy work is to do some sound bowl, then we do some breath work and some affirmations, and we get the party started. So during this time, all you really got to do is just relax. We got the bowl out today. Try to focus on your energy, your thoughts process, and things like that, and try to shift it if you are in a space that you don't want to be. Get rid of the stresses of the day and begin to relax so we can be able to exchange energy and learn together. All right? Jeez. Okay. Cat on early today. That was definitely a little loud. I always say that that means so this is the blue set to the tone of your throat for communication. So whenever it's loud like that without me really trying, I always recognize that the energy is good for good for communication right now when it's loud like that. So if some things you need to say, whether it be to yourself or someone else, the energy is primed for that. So make sure you take advantage of that right now. So the next thing we'll do is some breathing exercises. Let me see what we feel like doing. We either do 369, box breath 444, triangle 333. Or we do 478. I did 478 over myself over the weekend. So let's do triangle breath with 333. If you are unfamiliar with triangle breathing, again, it is you breathe in for a 3 count, you hold for a 3 count. You said it at the same time as me, huh? And you exhale for a 3 count. Well, while we're doing this, all you really have to do is just focus in on your breathing and your energy and getting to a great place and listening to the sound of my voice as I guide us through the breathing exercise, right? So on the count of three, we will start with triangle breathing. 3, 3, 3. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in 3, 2, 3. Hold 3, 2, 3. Release 3, 2, 3. Breathe in 3, 2, 3. Hold 3, 2, 3. Release 3, 2, 3. Last time, family. Breathe in 3, 2, 3. Hold 3, 2, 3. Release 3, 2, 3. All right, so now that we did our little breath work, and I want us to take some time and repeat some affirmations that'll be good to ignite the energy of your third eye, your intuition. So if you feel like it's ever off, these are things that you can say to be able to incorporate in your life to cultivate that energy strength again. And all you have to do is just repeat after me. I trust my intuition. My imagination is powerful. I think clearly. And my third eye sees all. All right, that's our warm-up, family. We can get started with the show. Get this party started. Side cam. All right. Yeah, Liberty. I got I'm I definitely have thoughts about that. I'll share that with you offline, especially when yeah. I support her show way more than she supports mine, which is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. But I'll share you that with offline. So before we get started, I want to remind you, this is your weekly reminder that you can support the channel and your own developing by purchasing the 7 Spaces of Healing, which is available now on Amazon. It is a book that will help you conceptualize and visualize 7 spaces that you need to incorporate within yourself, and that you also need to make sure that you are a part of to be able to support your evolution. Those spaces include love, a space for healing, a space for solitude, a space for trust, a space for risk without judgment, a space for accountability, and a space for forgiveness. Available now on Amazon. Go ahead and get you one. Don't forget. All right, so the next thing is, just want to chat a little bit. So first, I'm excited because it is Gem and Mineral Show season, and this one got off with a bang. I went to one over the weekend, and honestly, it's probably been the biggest one that I've been to so far, which it's kind of exciting, right? And it was a little overwhelming because it was just a lot. And I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that I missed, but I didn't miss getting me some things to be able to support, and I want to. See, that's why God don't like ugly, because it is available in ebook and softback, not software back. See? So I wanted to share with you all a couple of the things that I got from this weekend's Gem and Mineral Show. So I wanted some black tourmaline. Excuse me, this ain't tourmaline. This is obsidian. So I wanted some black obsidian. Black obsidian is a good stone that's good for your root and grounding and keeping feeling connected. So I honestly really didn't have anything that's that's what you get again. God don't like ugly. See, and you in here trying to mess with one of his chosen ones. Okay, so that's why you had that. That's why your fingers got crossed up, trying to be funny. So I was excited to find this. It was fairly priced. Dude had I also seen this guy that had a rock about this big. He was charging thank you. He was charged. It is really and I feel like I gotta polish it. I did a little Reiki on myself this weekend and I made sure to put this in between my feet. And I was holding on to it, making sure it's a good conductor of energy. So, black encompasses all things. So I connect with that. That was fantastic. I also went and got a key ring. I was so excited. So I looked so hard for this key ring. I could not find it. So thankful I had someone with me the second time I went. And just by fluke of design, they wanted to look at a table. And when we went to look at that table, the key ring was on there. So I got me a little key ring that I can hang on my keys that I'm so excited. It's probably just a little normal geode that they smoothed out and polished the edges so it doesn't hurt you any. It is clear quartz on the inside and it looks a little pink, but that has more to do with the stone itself and less with the crystal on the inside, the crystal formation on the inside. And lastly, but not least, I have been going ham sandwich with these rings and rings and rings and rings and rings. So I got myself a ring. Another ring. This one I love. Hold on. Okay, good. It's not messing up. So this is a mystic quartz surrounded by clear quartz. And it gives a little rainbow tone that the light doesn't necessarily pick up that well. But the crystals around it, I like it because it's kind of sparkly. And it makes me feel great. Hold on. Are we having issues, family? Do. Twitch. Okay, no, we still good. Now I got to check because I was having some issues. Before it was dropping the show and things like that. It's just been wilding out, period. So that was my gym and mineral show over the weekend. That was fantastic. Now I got a couple of things that I want to just discuss so we can be, we create a space for vulnerability and exchange. So that's one of the things we do. And I want to say something that really came to my spirit and that was important through my own experiences through the week, right? And the thing is knowing when to ask for help, right? So this winds up coming from I'm in this space like we dating, we working on our relationships with the opposite sex, we working on our relationship with the opposites of us, period, which is whether it be sex, whether it be sign, whether it be anything. That's what we're necessarily working on. And for myself, one of the things we don't always know when we need help, right? But I remember the first time I wound up coming to this space was what led to this show, right? So I wound up going through a career change and wasn't necessarily working and things of that nature. And then I knew I wanted to do something different, but I just didn't know what that was. And I didn't necessarily know which direction I wanted to go in. So I needed help, right? And at first, of course, you do your meditations, you say your prayers. So I acknowledged the fact that I needed help. And then I stayed open and aware for those opportunities to get help because I knew it would be something that I was unaware of because I already have tried all the things that I was aware of, right? And that led me to Reiki, right? So then next, I was talking with one of my homeboys who's also a Reiki practitioner. He's the one who actually pushed me in this direction and gave me the direction to be able to go down Reiki. And we were just talking about relationships and my feelings and things like that for myself, right? So I'm going to him and he giving me a little bit of work. And one of the things that he said to me that was rather important was, I need to work on my mother wound, because with that mother wound, I will keep seeing my mother in the women that I want to date, right? And the funny thing about that is, one of the reasons why this idea of knowing when you need help is important is because through this process of healing and evolution and learning Reiki, the first thing that I wound up doing, one of the major things that I had to do was work on that mother wound. First, I didn't even know I had a mother wound until I went to a space and someone pointed it out to me. So then once it became knowledge, I could not ignore it, and I had to do something. It required some sort of response. So of course we've learned these tools, these healing, and I got to a good place, right? So I feel as though I've done the work. I'm comfortable about where I'm at. And then my friend tells me I need to do more work, right? And I'm like, well, I've done all that I know, and I really don't know the next step or what to do next, right? Because I think I reached this space of acceptance and not necessarily content with the acceptance, but acceptance allows you to not be so emotionally overwhelmed with the goings on or the events or the happenings. So I reached this place of acceptance, and I got a little bit of understanding that I know that it's not necessarily that I'm the main character. I'm the main character in my life, but I'm not always the main character, and I may not be the main character in the story. So when I recognize that I don't really know what to do or where to go next, and I've exhausted all the tools that I am aware of, right, that I know, that was my sign to know that I need help, right? So I'm out here, of course, the same process. We learned the process the first time. I'm remaining aware, and I'm listening to the voice, my internal dialogue, my connection to the voice, looking for answers, and I'm paying attention to the people that I am around and what the people are saying, because they might be able to point me in the right direction as well. So recognizing that, I also recognize, since I feel like I've pulled back the layers, and I also understand the human mind is an amazing thing. It does have the tendency to block out things that that can be very harmful for you. So I know right now I need to seek the support of someone else, right? And I'm saying this to you so that you can understand, or so that we all can understand, that it is okay to seek support, right? We don't always have to know the answers, and as much as we can do it ourselves, it's always a little bit easier to do it with someone else, right? And I specialize in certain things. I respect the people who specialize in things that I don't. So I will be seeking some sort of support, whether it be through therapy. More than likely, it's going to be a little bit through therapy, because I know that therapists are very good at pulling back the layers. And I've been to therapy before, right? But therapy remains the tool. So it's time for me to go back to it to be able to use it again. And I say that to you again, so you don't be afraid to utilize the tools that are available to you, and to recognize when you need help, and to seek that help or ask for that help, right? Also, something I wound up reading that kind of really stuck to me, right? And it was very interesting because I never really thought of it in these terms, although I've seen it act out in life several different times. So the statement was, it was an article that I read, and it said, when a man loses his joy in life, he rarely says it. He just starts shrinking his world down to the size where disappointment can no longer reach him. And some of the examples that they gave in the article was, the author of the article was talking about how they used to have a weekly card game, and one of his friends that used to always come to the weekly card game just stopped coming to the card game. Or then he gave an example of his neighbor, where they would talk every day over the fence, but now his neighbor just waves as he ride by, right? And something that kind of sticks out to them is the shrinking down of this world into this, so that disappointment no longer can catch him or reach that man or whatever, right? But when I thought about this thing, disappointment isn't always the reason. I recognize how in my own life there are times where I start shrinking down my world as well too, right? So for example, if there's any time where there is financial like times like money get tight or anything like that, one of the things that I first start doing is stop going out. I start spending more time at home, and not saying that going out costs money, because it doesn't necessarily cost money, but it is evident of me doing this thing, shrinking down my world so that disappointment can't reach me, right? But when I started thinking about my own life, I recognized that in that statement, it can be replaced. That word disappointment can be replaced by many different things, right? So we actually talked about disappointment over the last couple of weeks, and we talked about where it manifests in our body and how we navigate disappointment, and we're working on our relationship with disappointment. So I felt comfortable with being able to deal with disappointment. Although it sucks, I'm better equipped to be able to deal with that. But when I started replacing the word, that disappointment, acknowledging what real feeling that I am trying to stay away from, and one of them is that I had to recognize that when I replace that word, that when I remove that word disappointment, I can replace it with unworthiness, right? So the example I gave is when like when financial or money gets a little bit tight, it's easy for me to shrink my world down, and that shrinking of my world winds up stemming from this idea of unworthiness, right? Not that I don't deserve anything, but I don't think that I should be going out. I'm not worthy of that. I'm not worthy of this. And we have done a lot of work on worthiness, right? It's even one of our words that we worked on together to be able to identify where we're going to evolve or reshape our relationship with those words. So worthy is one of the things that we're working on. And it's funny how when we work on these things, that doesn't absolve or mean that we will no longer deal with these things. They will still show up again. We just now have the tools to be able to navigate them a little differently and a little bit better, right? So my feelings of unworthiness, even though I've done all that work, I still have to recognize that there's still a space for me to be able to deal with unworthiness, right? And the wild thing about this is it's important that we identify when we are shrinking our worlds down and why we are shrinking our worlds down. Because if we don't point those things out, what winds up happening is we think that we are doing this to create a space for solitude, right? And solitude is a space that we need to have because it's good for quiet reflection and to obtain clarity. But when we don't identify that we are shrinking down our world and why we are shrinking down our world, then we don't always see where we can easily slide from a space of solitude to a space of isolation, right? And isolation only exasperates any of the other feelings that you are trying to avoid, right? So we say this, I said this, so we as a group, when we look at our life, we want to be able to start paying attention to those points where we are shrinking our world, again, why we're shrinking our world, and the emotions that we are trying to avoid so we can not fall into that slippery slope of going from a space of solitude to isolation, right? That's what we don't want. So ask yourself, are you in a space where you are shrinking down your world? And why are you shrinking down your world? And a lot of times we do that for many different reasons. As we say all the time, a lot of people use that as justification. Like they'll say, I'm protecting my peace. And honestly, they're sliding on that slippery slope from solitude to isolation, right? So think about that, family. Recognize that for yourself. I just wanted to share that moment. And now we can get to the store. the show, what we're discussing. Do, 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 do. So last week, this is a review for last week so we can catch up. We're all under this umbrella of the 12 universal laws. And last week, we wound up discussing the law of relativity, right? So, of course, the law of relativity winds up telling us that everything is relative and nothing has meaning all by itself. We want to understand that meaning is created through comparison. So the law of relativity really focuses on this idea of comparison, right? And I point that out specifically because today the law we're going to do is the law of polarity, and the law of polarity focuses on contrast, right? So with this law of relativity and comparison, comparison is to look at two things and notice the difference, right? So that's the importance of that. Meaning is again created through comparison, and events and challenges and experiences are neither good or bad. They take on meaning based on our perspective, context, comparison, and our mindset as we are processing what we're going through, right? We talked about why challenges exist. They exist because they help our capacity grow, our capacity for love, our capacity for emotions, our capacity for feelings, all those things. And once our capacity grows, those feelings and things wind up feeling a little bit smaller, right? We also talked about how emotional pain is also relative, right? In this sense that the pain from the emotions is real, but how intense we feel those things is very subjective and depends on our emotional resilience, our emotional experiences. That's where that idea of being triggered can come from, and our emotional expectations. Do we have fair expectations for ourselves and others, right? And I am not one of those people who think that you should not have expectations. Expectations, when they are healthy expectations, they wind up being somewhat of the soil for where we plant the seeds for our boundaries, right? And then we also looked at making sure that our boundaries are not necessarily so close to our limits that when somebody pushes up to that boundary, they're automatically across our limits, right? We also talked about the science behind that, which was behind the law of relativity, which winds up being cognitive appraisal theory. And that is events are simply neutral. And in cognitive appraisal, it winds up coming as how we appraise it, the value that we give to that, because experiences are neutral. We also talked about neuroscience as it relates to emotional intensity, and that emotional intensity is context dependent. Very important to understand that. And we also talked about the social comparison theory, in which humans instinctively and naturally compare themselves to assess several things. We use comparison to be able to assess our success. We use comparison to be able to assess our status, our adequacy, and our sense or feeling of safeties, right? We also talked about the implications of that law, right? Where we understood one, challenges are a reference point, and they are there to give us a contrast and perspective. We also learned that our experience is shaped by perspective and not necessarily circumstances. How we view it shapes our experiences more than the circumstances that we are dealing with, right? We also learned that comparison can either hurt or heal depending on how you use it, right? Because there is a healthy way to compare, and it's natural for as humans to be able to compare. Like I said, we use it to assess certain things, but that comparison can either hurt or help us depending on how we use it, right? We also learned that gratitude becomes the natural outcome when we grow our perspective and our emotional reactivity decreases as we understand relativity a little bit more, right? Also, the implication wound up being that suffering becomes optional. Although the pain is not, we don't get to choose the pain. How we suffer is optional. It's based on our perspective, our choices, our decisions, our how we view things, our experiences, right? Judgment also softens towards others when we think about the law of relativity, as we understand that self-criticism also decreases for us because we start to use comparison in a little more of a healthy way, right? We also discussed how it was applicable. How could we apply the law of relativity to our own lives? One, it gave us an explanation on why problems feel big or why they feel small. It's what we apply to it, right? It also wind up helping us to be able to reframe the way we view challenges without denying these challenges, without denying the importance of those challenges and what happened to us. And also, we understood that relativity and using it in a healthy way winds up building our resilience over some time, right? And lastly, we wind up understanding how the law of relativity wound up being applicable to us is that it helps us practice gratitude without forcing the gratitude. Like when you don't feel worthy, you first thing you try to tell yourself, well, I need to feel worthy. I feel worthy. When we don't want to force that, we want to make it be more of a natural exchange and ebb and flow. As the wave goes out, we know it's going to come back in. And that allows our energy to flow a little bit more, right? And this week, we start with the law of polarity, which is law 10 of the 12. We almost done. We got 2 more laws we want to discuss. But right now, we're on the law of polarity. So, what is the law of polarity? As we just said, the law of relativity focuses on comparison. The law of the law of polarity focuses on contrast. The difference between comparison and contrast, because they are 2 different words, comparison focuses on the differences. Contrast focuses on the similarities, right? So, of course, we had a law that focuses on differences. We also need to be able to cultivate our skills to be able to see similarities, right? And with the law of polarity, everything has an opposite, and those opposites are actually 2 extremes of the same thing. Right? So when we generally think of opposites, we think that they're 2 different things, right? But with the law of polarity, we're looking for the similarities. And a lot of times what we see as opposites are really the 2 different ends of the spectrum with all the emotions and feelings inside, right? So one of the important things of understanding this is so that we'll stop seeing opposites as separate or conflicting, and then move into them as understanding that they are on different degrees of the spectrum, right? And we talk about a lot of things in spectrum, and this law winds up supporting a lot of different things as on a spectrum. We know emotional intelligence is on the spectrum. We know intelligence is on a spectrum. And even the thing that a lot of people have a lot of arguments about around lately is sexuality being on the spectrum. But this law winds up showing us that pretty much everything is on a spectrum. Examples of that is hot and cold. Hey, Toddy, welcome to the party. Boop, boop, boop. Welcome to the party. Hey, perfect time. I swear I do be loving y'all with them gemstones. On by y'all name, I would feel like y'all superstars. Sorry, superstar. That Noriega popped in my mind, man. Jesus Christ. But anyway, So examples of that is hot and cold. We always talk about hot and cold. I just said that's why it's perfect that we're doing polarity, because we're moving from a cold season to a warmer season, right? But whether we call it hot or whether we call it cold, they both are on the spectrum of temperature, right? So we like to think of cold and hot as separate things or opposites, but they are different ends of the same spectrum. It's hot over here and it's cold over there, right? Or we can even think about things like love and hate. We think those are opposites, but what they wind up being is being on the same spectrum of emotions, right? So we have love and hate. There is a ton of emotions between those things. But even though we're talking about love and hate separately, they're both under the umbrella of emotions. Or how we do a lot of work around here. We talk about vibrational energy, right? We talk about high vibrational energy or low vibrational energy, but it doesn't matter. It does matter because they are different, but they are not separate things, right? High vibrational or low vibrational, they're still under the umbrella of energy, right? So they're two different ends of the spectrum. And I say this, one of the things that we want to understand is this is why sometimes it's easy for us to be able to spiral up or down in that spectrum, right? So it's easy for us to go from a space of happiness to a space of sadness, right? Because they are on the same spectrum. They're not independent of each other. So just like we can spiral down, that's why we talked about us having the power to be able to change the energy, because we can also spiral up. We don't even have to get off the timeline or get off of that plane because it is already on that spectrum, right? Also, we want to make sure we understand what this law of excuse me, I say parallelism, but that's something different. Polarity is that you do not eliminate the negative. You just shift on the spectrum. That's all it is. So negative exists because it is one end of the spectrum as positive is the other, right? So when we are doing this evolution of ourselves and we're trying to be the best version of ourselves, we do want to move in the space where we understand that we are not eliminating the negative. That's one of the reasons why I always say peace is not the absence of conflict. It really is knowing how to navigate conflict in a healthy way, right? Because in peaceful times, you can still have conflict. For example, we're living in America right now, right? And technically, in America, in our country, in the United States, we are living in peaceful times. We as people are not necessarily dealing with war, right? But with that being said, we also understand that that does not mean we are not in the absence of conflict, because America is actively in conflict right now, even though that we are in a state of peace, right? So again, we just want to know that when we're thinking about these things, we cannot eliminate negative. We're just going to be able to shift the degree on what we feel it. And as we shift enough, we'll be on the positive side of the spectrum, right? And even on that positive side, a lot of times we wind up spending our time trying to get back to the middle, because the balance resides in the middle, not in the extremes. The contentment resides in the middle, not in the extremes. So being positive all the time can be just as detrimental as being negative all the time, right? Next, we want to be able to discuss how emotional polarity is a part of everyday life. That's why we're pointing this out. That's why we even talked about emotions, love, hate, sadness, and joy, positive, negative. All those things are part of the duality and the polarity of everyday life. There is no avoiding it. It's a part of the energy structure. It's the part of the ecosystem that we live in, right? So we deal with, a lot of times we wind up dealing with these emotional struggles because we want to eliminate the negative instead of accepting the role that it plays, right? One thing, one good role that negative plays is it gives us a perspective. So then when we reach positive, we know it's positive because we have experienced negative, right? So we don't want to be in a space where we're trying to remove those experiences because it is a part of it. We want to make sure that we be in a space where we accept the role that it plays. It helps to create the balance, or like we like to say a lot of times, it is the thing that helps us remain humble. That's how we remain humble, right? And when we look at the spectrum, we want to look at the spectrum as a process or a guide to get you from one emotion to the next, right? So for example, anger and compassion winds up being two ends of the spectrum for the example, right? So we can start in this space of anger, right? And we can even use that as an example because one of the reasons I started this show was because I was very much in a space of anger. But we have moved beyond that. That space of anger, when you move along the spectrum, you can go from anger to a space of frustration, right? Well, that's one of the reasons why we said anger is a masked emotion a lot of times. You got to pull back the layer to see what anger is protecting or covering, right? So we can move from anger to a space of frustration. And although frustration is intense, it's not as intense as anger, right? And once we get to this space of frustration, we can move from frustration to acceptance, right? And acceptance does not mean that you agree. It just lets you know that there are limits to what you can do, and some things are the way they are, and there is nothing you can do, right? But acceptance is less intense than frustration or anger. And once we move to that space of acceptance, we can move to a space of compassion. And compassion is a space that allows us to be able to feel comfortable, be able to understand. Once we get to that space of compassion, the first person that we wind up giving that compassion to, or who we should, is ourselves. And once we exercise the skill of compassion with ourselves, it makes it a little bit easier to be able to share that compassion with others. Another example winds up being anxiety. Many of us deal with anxiety. We don't always know how to label it. It took me a long time to be able to label that was anxiety that I was feeling, right? Because sometimes it just makes you feel a little jittery. You know what I mean? Like butterflies in your stomach. Whether it's good or bad, that's what anxiety, we have all these things to be able to label it instead of calling it what it is. Those butterflies in your stomach is anxiety. You are anxious about something. So we can move from a space of anxiety to a space of concern as we move along the spectrum. And then we move from concern to a space of calmness. And as we move from a space of calmness, we can slide into the other end of the spectrum, which is confidence. We can move from anxiety to confidence because it's a spectrum, right? Also, when we think about this, we want to make sure that we understand that we don't want to ignore pain. We don't want to suppress emotions. And we don't want to pretend that negative does not exist. None of those things are necessarily helpful because they do not help us cultivate the tools to be able to navigate these emotions and feelings, right? So we don't want to ignore pain because ignoring it doesn't make it go away, which many of us have. We just learn to move on from it and not necessarily address it. And a lot of times we don't always recognize that we're ignoring it. But when you don't address it and you just move on from it, whether you're conscious of it or not, what you are doing is ignoring the pain, right? We don't want to suppress emotions. That's what winds up happening a lot of times when we just move on without addressing it. That moving on forces us to suppress the emotions because we are not dealing with it. And we don't want to play pretend games, because that pretending that it doesn't exist, again, does not allow us a space to be able to address it. It doesn't give us a space to cultivate the tools that we will need to address these negative experiences that we are having, right? And now, because we know that emotions are temporary, that means we know that since they are temporary, we can move through them, right? So you can control your emotions once you apply the knowledge that they are temporary. That's the perfect example of that is when we had our discussions about the happiness paradox, right? A lot of people are searching for happiness as though it is a constant state. But one thing about happiness, and what makes the happiness paradox very interesting, is it says that the people who chase after happiness are the least happy, because they are projecting to the world that they don't have happiness. That means they don't have a space where they can be gratitude or thankful for the things that they have right now. And they're looking for something to be consistent. But happiness is supposed to come back to normal, or to another emotion, to a baseline emotion, because these emotions are temporary. That's one of the reasons that we talked about be mindful of our feelings or the stories that we're telling ourselves, because we don't want to shape a lifetime story on temporary emotions. That can be very dangerous for us. Oh, shoot. All right, I've been trying to make clips so I don't have to go through this whole 2-hour video and change things. So that's what that's all about, right? Next, as we learn about these things, we want to make sure we understand the science that supports some of our ideas or some of this information. So we don't just think that it's out the wind. We like to draw connections, right? One thing, neuroscience winds up supporting this idea of polarity by saying that emotions are not binary. It's not on and off or good or bad. It's not like that. They exist in continuous dimensions. That's one of the reasons why you can't stay in a state of happiness, because it's continuous dimensions. We flow back and forth between all of them. No matter how happy you are, no matter how much you do to always have happiness in your life, negative or bad things are unavoidable. You're going to have to experience loss. You're going to have to experience disappointment. Now, of course, what we're learning with this is the scale or the intensity that we feel those things vary, but they exist all the time, right? They exist for us always. And what winds up happening, and when we understand this with neuroscience, is that our brain regulates emotions by shifting the intensity. It doesn't turn them off, right? So one of the reasons why we can move from anxiety to confidence is because our brain is regulating emotions by shifting the intensity. We don't feel the intensity of the anxiety as much anymore because our brain has shifted the intensity to confidence. So we feel the energy of confidence more than we feel the energy of anxiety. But it's very interesting how we can slide back into that anxiety. Like, for example, if you've ever played a sport, you understand what that means, right? I remember when I played football, right? This was very interesting. You can always tell. Even though many of us were confident in our skills to play football, listen, that bathroom would be blowing up because everybody would still be nervous. They still have anxiety about the game. And it's funny how collectively it would make many of us have to go to the bathroom. So, which is crazy like that. So you know, or I think about when I was modeling, I at some point, I had done it so many times and been in front of so many people that I was confident that I was a good model, but I still got nervous every show, even though I knew I was going to do good. That doesn't remove that I don't feel nervous. I still will be confident when it's time to go that I'm going to do a good job. But before that, I still had to deal with the nervousness or the anxiety that came up from that, right? Next thing that supports the law of polarity is autonomic nervous system. We learned a whole bunch of different words. Like we did the reticular one that kept showing up, but this one is autonomic nervous system. And what that is the autonomic nervous system has two main branches. There's one where you learn about the sympathetic, and we've heard about the sympathetic nervous system. That winds up creating the activation. It winds up creating the flight or fight emotions that we deal with. That comes from our sympathetic part of our nervous system. And then the second part is parasympathetic. Very simple, very simple. And the parasympathetic is the part that calms us. It gives us a space where we can feel like we can rest, and gives us a space to be able to digest some of the things that we wind up experiencing, right? That's where the balance comes between, right? We got one to raise us up, and we got one to calm us down. That is autonomic nervous system, ANS. Also, psychophysics supports this idea of polarity. It supports it by saying perception requires contrast. That's simple. We perceive change. That's simple as it is. It requires contrast so we can perceive change, right? Light is noticeable relative to darkness. That's that idea of out of darkness, let there be light. The reason why we can see the light is because we've seen the darkness. And we also know that once we see the light, we also know that darkness is now fall, because they come together. They are the balance. They bring it up. That's it, right? And that's that comparison and contrast that we see to be able to navigate that perception, to create perception for ourselves, right? Well, it's not the last one. There are plenty more you can look up. But the next thing that supports it is dialectic behavior therapy, right? We hear a lot about the behavioral, not the, what is the one? I keep on calling it behavioral management therapy or something like that. But it's the therapy that allows you to be able to change your behaviors, whatever that may be, right? So dialectic behavior therapy, right? This states that two opposites can be true and part of the same system. What that means is, again, what we've been talking about, where you can flow back and forth between them. We can flow from acceptance to change, and we can flow with vulnerability to strength. And that flow between is how we view them. Right? As we change our perspectives, how we view them a little bit different. Remember, at one time we used to think that vulnerability was a sign of weakness, right? We didn't want anybody to take advantage of us because we were being vulnerable. That's thinking of vulnerability as a sign of weakness. But now, as we become vulnerable, we recognize, there we go, thank you, cognitive behavioral therapy. Thank you. I could not remember CBT. What am I was talking about? BMF? You's a bad mother sucker. Nah, thank you, family. No, you 100% right. That's what it is. You are 100% right. It is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That's what it is. Thank you. Which I don't know. Listen, I love the behavioral theories because they really do reflect human behavior. So that's one of the things I'm impartial to. But you are 100% correct. Nope, ain't no wrong. Trust your spirit. That was very specific, and that was very specific. It was too specific to be wrong. You feel me? So you tapped into that universal knowledge, and you helped the brother out, because I was stuck like Chuck. Next, what are the implications of this information that we have with the law of polarity, right? One implication is growth requires contrast, right? Struggle is not a sign of failure. It winds up being a necessary reference point, right? That's why it helps us build the gratitude. So when we move from that struggle, we are very much thankful. It's a reference point. So that's how we know we're not struggling anymore. It's a great reference point. And the bad thing about it, or one of the things that winds up being difficult for a lot of us, is if we're struggling, we don't always be able to see where we move beyond that struggle in a lot of different things because we're just focused on that reference point. But that struggle is only a reference point, and we're supposed to have something to contrast it. So when you're struggling, you can guarantee soon enough you're going to get something to contrast it, and something that contrasts struggle is stability, right? So you make the steps to move towards stability. Of course, you got to get there. There's a spectrum in between that, but struggle is not a sign of failure, right? And as we recognize calmness, it's because we have experienced stress. That's why we know what calm feels like. If we never experience stress, we won't necessarily know we're calm, right? Or if we calm, that's how we know what stress is, because it feels different than calmness, right? It's important that when we think about this process, especially when it comes to growth, we don't want to we want to make sure that we are defining these experiences by what they are and not what they aren't. What I mean by that is we don't want to build what we want, what is good, on what bad is not. Because sometimes those things overlap. And we'll be thinking that good is the opposite, the positive is the opposite of negative, but that's not necessarily so, right? We don't want to do it as though, well, this must be that because of what is not. We want to define it as what it is. We want to define what positive is by itself and what negative is by itself, and not saying that positive is what negative is not. That's not necessarily so, right? And one of the reasons it's like that is because, like an example, we can think about peace and we can think about stress, right? And if we've been stressed, the way that we want to define our peace is doing the exact opposite of what stress is, right? But what winds up happening is we miss things, because whether it's peace or stress, both of them can be emotionally overwhelming. If you've ever had, as a matter of fact, we say it all the time, an overwhelming sense of peace. And then we also know it's overwhelming stress. They both can be defined the same way. That's why we don't want to say we don't want to define peace as what stress is not, because they both still fall under the same umbrella. Remember, we're moving along the spectrum. That means they are two ends of the exact same thing, right? So we don't want to do that. Next implication is resistance. Resistance to going through that flow strengthens the opposite, right? So that is fighting against that shift. Fighting against that shift only intensifies what we're feeling, right? So resisting fear only creates more fear, right? So if we're trying to resist being afraid, we only do that by being more afraid, right? Or if we get in a space where we don't want anger to be the first emotion that we put out, we will easily wind up suppressing that anger. And when we suppress our anger, all it does is create resentment, right? It only intensifies it. When we fight and go against it, it's better to try to figure out ways to find a way to expel that energy in healthy ways. For example, like I said, when we started the show, I was very much in a space of anger. And creating this show wound up giving me and us a space to be able to dispel or disperse that anger in a healthy way, right? Also, we want to understand, important implication is small shifts matter more than big leaps, right? Because it matters more than big leaps. Small shifts matter more than big leaps, right? Change does not require going from extreme to extreme. You don't have to go from sadness to happiness, right? And when we do, like we said, we wind up inadvertently suppressing the other emotions on the spectrum. To get from sadness to happiness, there are other emotions that we need to experience. That's why they talk about the stages of grief. The stages of grief is an example of the spectrum that you go across when you're dealing with grief, right? And we want to make sure that we understand that. So we create a space for us to be able to experience all the emotions on the spectrum, right? Ultimately, as I brought up earlier, an implication too is that we wind up having to bring it back to the middle, like I said, right? Health and well-being come from modulation, right? And unfortunately, we want perfection. But that perfection could be dangerous. Going to the other end of the spectrum could be dangerous. Like I said, just like being negative all the time is bad, being positive all the time is bad, right? Why? Too much positivity is a sign of denial. You're denying some of the things that naturally occur and happen. Now, you might want to be able to create a positive interpretation, a positive perspective, but too much positivity is a sign of denial. That's why it can be just as dangerous, right? Or too much negativity winds up creating despair, right? Or too much control winds up creating rigidity. You be too rigid. You can't even be flexible or mutable or being able to change. I'm a Pisces, a water sign. One of the reasons why I like that is because water is very flexible. It takes the shape of the container that it is in. Always remember that. If I put water in a cup, it's going to be the shape of that cup. If I put it in a bottle, it's going to be the shape of the bottle. If I pour it in my hand, it's going to take in the shape of my hand, however I do it in a cup, right? That's why I like it. So also another example is too much surrender winds up creating passivity. And we don't want to function passivity, right? So too much of anything is bad for you, whether it be food or emotions. The saying is still true, right? Another implication is that our relationships improve when we understand polarity, right? We experience a lot of conflict because we see opposites as enemies instead of complements. The other end that bring balances, right? And especially when we use a lot of language around now where ops are the enemy. Ops are the ones that we wind up going against. But when in our development and our understanding, we know that opposites are complements of each other. That's why they say opposites attract. That create the balance. It's not that they attract. They already exist. They are two ends of the same thing. That's why we move from opposites attract. That's why I always say opposites might attract, but like stay together. That's the balance, right? But we want to start looking at these things necessarily as complements of each other, right? For example, right, we talk about like emotional thinking is a bad thing, right? But we need a balance of that. So logic, we can slide through logic and emotion and back and forth because they are two ends of the same spectrum, right? Male and female, we are two ends of the same spectrum. You feel me? So a logical thinker and emotional thinker, neither one is better. They complement each other. They're not opposites. They're not enemies of the other. They are opposites, but they are not enemies of the other. Another implication that's important to us is we gain emotional intelligence, right? As we move away from wanting to apply good or bad to things, we now understand that they are both really the same thing. Good and bad are on the same spectrum. So that's why we talk about it a lot of times in our conversations, that we don't want to place things, categorize so many things as good or bad. We just want to accept them as neutral and know that we give the meaning as good or bad, right? Next, how is the law of polarity applicable to my life? One, it shows that we can change without forcing the positivity, right? We don't have to jump from sadness to joy or overwhelmed to peace. One of the reasons why we don't even want to do that is because unconsciously or consciously expecting that of ourselves winds up seeing impossible. That's why some people can't move, because they be like, I don't even know how to get to happiness. You don't got to get to happiness first. You got to get to the next step on the spectrum, right? Some people can't move because they're overwhelmed. It seems impossible, because it is. It is impossible to go straight from sadness to happiness. It's impossible. And that's how some people get stuck in there, because they're expecting themselves to go straight from sadness to happiness, but that's an impossible feat. You got to go from sadness to grief or frustration, and you move on down until you create some calmness, some stability, and then you get to some sense of happiness, right? We want to break this down. It winds up being applicable because it's breaking it down so we can give ourselves reasonable goals. What do we call that? SMART goals. We talk about them all the time. Small, measurable, what is it? I don't know. SMART goals. I forget. Tot, you out there. What SMART goals stand for? I know you remember. Next implication, we can use it to work with our own emotions, right? When we recognize it as one end of the spectrum, we naturally soften because we remove the pressure to be at the other end, right? So when we recognize that sadness is part of the spectrum, we can deal with that and navigate that and address that, because it removes the pressure that we place on ourselves to have to be happy. Sadness is a space that we need to spend some time in, right? So that's how we learn how to navigate it, right? Like, of course, we can learn some things vicariously, but experience is always the best teacher, right? And when it comes to the emotions, we are going to experience them. They are very difficult to learn vicariously, right? Unless you're necessarily a victim, right? It's the awareness that winds up moving us forward, right? Also, it allows us to handle setback without identity damage. There we go. You looked it up. I thank you. Hey, Liberty, you, God bless you. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. There we go. SMART goals. So realistic goals. That's what time about. I always say that. Realistic goals, realistic goals. So we get to a space where we can handle setbacks without perfectly. But I'm glad you're still here, because I want to hit these questions. I'm about to get off too. I wanted you to hear these questions. So by understanding that these emotions are temporary states, it makes it a little bit easier for us to stop internalizing these things as a reflection of who we are, and be able to receive them more as a reflection of where we are on that spectrum, right? So when we fail, failure is not a reflection of who we are. Failure is a part of the spectrum of success. You got to experience failure to experience success, right? So we don't have to internalize these things as a reflection of who we are as a person. I made a mistake. That doesn't mean I'm a failure, right? I can still see success, right? Because I understand that failure is reflective as where I am on this process. I'm learning about the success, the failures of this, so I can get to the success. If I don't know how I fail, then I won't know how to succeed as well, right? And I hope becomes logical and not just a blind feeling, or like I used to say, hope is for suckers, right? That's one of the main applications to that. Now, I do want to say we got some questions. You want to be able to assess where you are on this process or how you navigate. Hey, good. How you navigate polarity. We got a couple of questions to be able to assess yourself, right? One is, do you label emotions as good or bad? Is that where you feel safe? By being able to apply a label to something. Because then once you label it, it seems as though it's easier to navigate, or not really navigate, but easier to control because now it has a label, right? Another question we can ask ourselves is, do I believe possible change is possible from where I am? That's an interesting one, because I can personally say that yes, we can believe that change is possible for where we are, but sometimes seeing that change can be very difficult. That's why some people don't know how to get from sadness to happiness, because they can't see that change, right? They understand that even though they're sad, they can change from that sadness. But one of the things that they cannot do is visualize or conceptualize that sadness itself, right? This is why we run into people who say, this is just who I am. They cannot see the change, right? Like, they understand that as humans, we all change. They know they're not the same person that they was when they were 5 years old. So they understand that change, but they have given up on the possibilities because they cannot see how they get to that change. So ask yourself, do you think that change is possible from where you are? And if you say yes, also think about some of the things that make it a little difficult for you to be able to see that change, right? Another good question that we want to ask ourselves is, can I name a small step towards the opposite pole? One of the best things, one good thing from understanding the law of polarity is now it really does force us to be able to see life as a spectrum, right? And one thing, the skill that we want to be able to, yes, isolation is definitely unhealthy. We want to start seeing things on the spectrum. And when we start visualizing or seeing these things on the spectrum, that's when we start sharpening or cultivating our skill to actually be able to identify the next step to get to the pole. Because we just said the jump from sadness to happiness is impossible. So we got to figure out what's that next step. And once we understand polarity, we'll start looking for what's the next step where you don't feel so sad anymore. You know what I mean? You might move from sadness to anxious to calmness to goddamn to stableness, right? It can be any of those things. But a good question to ask yourself is, can you name a small step towards the opposite pole? I struggle with that. I can't always identify what's the next step. I even process things where I want to jump from sadness because I don't want to feel that anymore to happiness. You know what I mean? Or I want to go from anxiety straight to confidence. But there is emotions in between that shapes us, and we have a relationship because it creates responses in us. But we want to be able to identify what the next step is so we know what we are feeling. Another good question to ask yourself is, do I judge myself for feeling fear, doubt, or sadness? Many of us do that. We can be our most stringent, most difficult, the hardest critic that we have. because we judge ourselves so harshly for feeling natural things that are on the spectrum. We can be hard, especially when it comes to sadness. Some people don't create space for sadness. We do that. We socialize little boys in that space where when they come from sadness or they're crying, we tell them boys don't cry, right? So they grow up to judge themselves harshly. Or we grow up to judge ourselves harshly because we don't create a space to be able to feel these things. So how are you judging yourself for feeling things like fear, doubt, or sadness? Again, they are part of the spectrum, right? Another question you want to ask yourself to be able to assess is, and we can wrap it up, this will be the last question. Do I feel more flexible emotionally than I used to? That's a good question. One of the reasons we're trying to evolve and become the best version of ourselves is for this right here. It's so that we can be more emotionally flexible. And by emotionally flexible, that means that we can travel along the spectrum. That does not mean bending or flexing to break or to not feel a thing. It's flexible, so we allow ourselves to feel the emotions along the spectrum, right? So ask yourself, as you're evolving and growing into the best version of yourself, do you feel more flexible emotionally than you used to, right? So myself, even though there's still more work to do, because evolution is never ending, I can confidently say that I am more emotionally flexible because I allow myself to feel the things, right? And the funny thing about it is, where the biggest growth is allowing myself to feel positive things, right? Because unconsciously, I remember compliments used to make me feel weird. So I didn't necessarily think I was deserving of compliments when I win certain things, especially when it wasn't just based on my own effort. Did somebody feel like I deserve it, or I won by luck or the alignment of the energy, right? So the way that I wound up being a little more emotionally flexible is because I think I allow myself to feel, I know that's right, to feel other emotions like receiving. I struggle with receiving, especially when I'm a giver. So I never really allowed myself to be able to receive, but now I allow myself to receive a little bit more. That is a fantastic indicator that you are able to cry, right? Many of us do not allow ourselves to cry because of how we feel about the feelings, the stories that we tell ourselves. But as we evolve, we understand that creating this space to cry is important. As a matter of fact, I was talking to someone the other day and they was like, I don't know, I feel like I'm about to cry. Which was the same indicator for you, Liberty. It was a fantastic indicator for them because that shows that they too have grown and they're more emotionally flexible, because there was one space that they didn't even allow themselves. They would judge themselves harshly for feeling like they want to cry, right? All of us, and not just them, me. I used to judge myself harshly for feeling like I want to cry. And it was funny because when I was a kid, I was a waterhead. I'd be in a fight with somebody and crying, right? But somewhere along the line, I judged myself so harshly that I did not allow myself to feel that spectrum. So you ask yourself, are you more emotionally flexible than you used to be, right? Family, I appreciate you. That is the end of this week's show. Next week, we will be discussing the law of rhythm. So you want to join us for that on Tuesday. If you have some time, join us Thursday as we continue reading Changeling for Thursday night book club. I'm loving the book. It's a great book if you like kind of mystical, magical, and horror. Changeling is a great book for that, right? So join us as we do that. And if you got some time, go ahead and support one of the Soul family as they do, I was about to call it Battle of the Bands, but a versus on TikTok. You can go check out Catch Kitchen. And before we get out of here, I want to remind you that you can trust your intuition. Your imagination is powerful. You do think clearly, especially when we stop focusing on the fog. We can see the clearing. And your third eye, intuition, sees all. So trust it. Family, I thank you. I look forward to seeing you Thursday. And again, if you can't make it Thursday, I can't wait to have you back here on Tuesday as we continue our discussion of the 12 laws, 12 universal laws. We're discussing law 10, the law of women, of rhythm, right? Thanks, family, again. And I will see you Thursday or Tuesday. And again, don't forget, 7 Spaces of Healing, available now on Amazon. Gratitude, family, and until next time, peace.